So tell us, what do you think are the key lessons that Africa can draw from the Asian experience, the Asian tigers experience?
I think, if you look at it historically, in the 1950s, I think some of these transition or the rapid demographic transition has already happened there. And it was driven primarily by the need to control population growth rate, particularly in India and China and so on. They were really growing at a very rapid rate. There were high levels of poverty and so on. So that was actually the primary incentive for them to reduce growth rate, and which eventually the bonus that came through the first dividend was actually that rise in the in the working age population. So different countries experienced these transitions, these demographic dividend stages at different time point, at different points in time. The demographic dividend as a whole can actually last up to, let's say, 50 years or something. The process is very slow. I think that's something that people don't really understand. So what I meant by that is that, for instance, Hong Kong or Singapore, for instance, or even Republic of Korea or South Korea, they experienced that transition much earlier. And part of the reason was that there was a heavy investment on family planning, and in fact quite rigorous family planning policy to control population growth rate. Alongside, I think what they did alongside was actually the investment in education, and particularly female education. And that had a dramatic impact, natural impact on the infant and child mortality rates. So for instance, if you look at the infant mortality rate in these countries, in these tiger economies, or the Asian tigers, I mean, they're at a very low level. I think that was probably that actually naturally triggered a decline in fertility, which eventually had some influence later on. And later, I mean, during that stage, probably in the mid 1970s and so on, China really came up with their policy. It was actually primarily aimed at reducing population growth rate, but they had a very clear idea about economic, improving economy, or probably the best thing to say is actually in the 1979, to be precise. That was the time that China introduced the market economy, or in other words, more free, open economy, and that was what they did was that alongside they introduced the one-child policy, family planning policy. They also created these special economic zones across the country. That really boosted the economy, because it's not just through the people migrating from rural areas to cities and so on, but that really created, literally China opened up its economy to the rest of the world. And that was the effect or the benefit, that particular bonus, that demographic bonus was seen in the last probably 15 years or so, and now it'll probably fade a little bit after 2020. And in the long run, unless China is going to reverse its policy, which they have already done, they have already taken steps, it's going to. So the thing is that they have actually had that window of opportunity. Now India is experiencing that opportunity, and currently, but there are huge challenges for India. The significant challenge is the education, particularly there's a, as we heard before, I mean, there's a considerable gender gap in education, and that needs to be addressed. And family planning, I mean, as a whole, we need to create an environment that, that women would use contraception not to just delay births, but also, actually, so it's actually through education, women would delay their marriage, and then eventually, the childbearing or the births. And so the ideology is that a later, longer, and fewer approach. That's what China did, and that might, that's a kind of approach that we need, particularly in the African context. So coming back to Africa, I think what we need is definitely, a greater investment in family planning, which has to go in tandem with education, female education, particularly. So how does that work? Is actually, they are actually complementary process. To put it simply, if there are economic opportunities, that would really be a natural incentive for women to marry late, or to form later, partnership and so on. And then that would also have an impact on the number of children they would have in the future. And so all these processes are interdependent, and that needs to be taken into account. There is tremendous potential for Africa to harness this demographic dividend. The challenge, however, is that you need to really have good policies in place. Not just policies, but also governance. We need to have very governance, accountability, and these are quite important. I think that has to really work in different, work uniformly across different sectors: education, health, labor markets, everything that has to really work. And that's not easy. That's definitely not easy. So there are challenges, but Africa's sort of opportunities are, if you look at, for instance, from now till the end of the century, some of the countries, especially in West Africa or East Africa, are going to really harness this demographic dividend. Assuming that things go according to plans, they will really benefit from this demographic dividend, in the middle of the century. So that's definitely going to happen. The other important point is regarding sustaining this demographic dividend. And that's where the critical question of, where would you draw the line for fertility? So would you draw would you say that the fertility has to really decline below replacement level and sub-replacement level? We don't want small windows of opportunity. So we want to really have those windows of opportunity which can be sustained in the population. I think that's a challenge. That's not easy.